Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Well, I'm happy to have two repeat guests on today. Not to the audience, but to us, right?
Yeah, guys, we really appreciate, just for the sake of the audience knowing what's going on, we recorded probably better than an hour last time. And then we had a problem with the file. So now Larry Vangilder and Mr. Kurzejeski is back with us to record again.
Yeah, we're glad to have y'all back. And for those of you who may not be aware, Eric and Larry were responsible for some of the really fundamental research that established a lot of our understanding about wild turkey biology and management. And most of you guys' work was with the Missouri Department of Conservation, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, Eric, Larry, I have read quite a few things that you guys have written over the years, and just want to say that I really appreciate your contributions to what we know about turkeys. It's definitely influenced me greatly.
Yeah, same for me.
A fun job, really. You know?
Maybe somebody will care enough about us to interview us one day.
Yeah.
Don't hold your breath, Will.
Yeah, I won't.
Yeah, so I guess we can kick it off again. I know when I talked to Will after our previous episode, both of us, had some ideas about things that we wish we had asked you, and other things that we were really glad we talked about. And you guys being in the early days of turkey research, we thought it'd be really great to pick your brain more about the history of turkeys and turkey research, and just hear you guys, talk us through what you were going through, and what the conversations were, those kinds of things, to get that perspective that you guys have.
Well, I'm trying to think back, Larry.
Yeah.
What were the conversations? My God. The first major project we got going on, kind of the idea came about in the late 70s. And I think I know the primary driver was the fact that we'd instituted fall turkey hunting. It had been very successful in terms of participation. We had 50,000 participants in the state, and we began to wonder what harvest rates, particularly on hens, looked like in northern Missouri. That's where some of our highest harvests were, and we also thought that we assumed that there was maybe greater vulnerability because it was 30-40% forested and a lot of open ground. Birds were very visible. And so that's where we kind of got the idea rolling, that we wanted to do some long-term work to look at harvest rates on hens and reproductive success and general population parameters. We did not do any work on gobblers up there at that time. The whole concern was what's going on with the female segment of the population and what type of harvest rates are we having. So that got us rolling in the early 80s, and that project went through, Larry, 86, 7, somewhere in there?
Probably 88, I think.
Okay.
And then we moved down to the Ozarks to start a long-term study that lasted probably more than 10 years down there, about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we did have a few banded gobblers.
In North Missouri,
In North
but we didn't have
Missouri,
anything with any statistical validity behind it. Yeah.
We had a direct return rate, I remember, of 21%. Now, why I remember that, I don't know. That's what the direct return rate of bands were. So
Yeah.
that gives you some idea of the harvest. But as Eric said, the sample size was probably not very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a point in time where there was some uncertainty as to how well turkeys would even do in that northern Missouri landscape. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we kind of went through the brief history. It was fairly comical, but it's a lesson I'd always made sure I integrated into some of the wildlife classes I was teaching at the university. We had a private citizen who'd grown up in southern Missouri, and turkeys were doing reasonably well down there. And he thought they'd do fine in North Missouri. And John Lewis, who was our mentor and the turkey biologist of the state, and pretty much everybody in the conservation department thought there's no way in heck they'll exist up there.
Mm-hmm.
This individual kept pushing the department to try a release. They told him, well, the standard is you get 5,000 somewhat contiguous acres signed up of landowners who want a release. We'll evaluate the habitat. He did that. Department came back and said, you better get 10,000. He did that. The department said, we're still not sure this is going to work. Maybe you ought to get 15,000. He came back with 20,000 acres signed up, and they said, this guy's not going away. So in 61, much to the chagrin of the agency, I think about a dozen birds were released in North Missouri. And it rewrote history, because we really did not think they would survive up there. And then you started looking at the entire upper Midwest as potential areas where turkeys might do well. And we'd have eventually learned this on our own, but if it hadn't been for that one individual.
Yeah, it was citizen-led.
It'd have been another decade or more before we got birds up there.
It's the kind of thinking, all the turkeys that were left are in the Ozarks and the timbers. They surely can't live in North Missouri where there's no timber hardly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We put, like Eric said, put them in there in early 60s, and the population exploded.
Blew up, yeah.
I mean, it exploded.
And was it the limiting factor that you guys hypothesized in that landscape would be the habitat, or would it be their vulnerability to harvest in that landscape?
It was the habitat.
Yeah, the habitat. Too much open ground. They live where they eat acorns. And that was
food availability. Although corn and soybeans pretty well took care of that.
Yeah,
severity of winters was even questionable. And what nobody paid attention to was a lot of the old historical record that showed that turkeys were replete throughout that country in days of early exploration, and they were living in areas with very limited timber. And it was kind of like, no, they got to have 10,000 acres of continuous, predominantly timbered ground to survive. That was kind of the thinking of the day. So it was cool. It
turns out that is probably the worst habitat.
Yeah.
You want to know the truth about it.
Yeah. The closed canopy hardwood.
I mean, that's probably the worst habitat, but that's basically where turkeys were left, really.
Yeah.
And so then again, we didn't have any idea what the harvest rates might look like up there. Again, an assumption, much more open, much more accessible, probably more vulnerable to harvest. And, that's what got us thinking along the lines of starting that first project was, the fall season's really popular. What are we doing up here? What percent of the population might be removed through harvest?
Mm-hmm.
That started the ball rolling.
Yeah.
But
do you guys remember?
They're similar, but we also wanted to add looking at gobbler harvest mortality.
Yeah, so we had both gobblers and hens radio marked down the Ozarks. And, I mean, I was just looking back at one of the papers. I think average hen success over that 10 years or so was something like 36%.
Down the Ozarks.
Down the Ozarks.
Mm.
Gobbler harvest rates, though, were more like 40%. Adult gobbler harvest
Oh,
rate.
wow.
Juvenile gobbler harvest rates were half that. And we found that in multiple studies over in Kentucky, working with George Wright. He had some years where he had a 60% harvest rate of adults, but like 15% on jakes. So those jakes were carrying them through, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty well hammering the adult population every year.
But then in North Missouri, again, we had limited poor data on gobblers, and it was 20-some% direct recovery. But when they did do some telemetry studies in the early 2000s in North Missouri, again, all private ground, they were seeing harvest rates that were 16 to 25% over multiple years. So Larry's work in the Ozarks was all on public ground.
Yeah.
I think that makes a big difference, obviously.
Sure.
And also, the Peck Ranch study area had, quote, Peck Ranch in the middle of it, which is 36 square miles. And so we had a special hunt in there, but it didn't get a lot of hunting pressure. And then we had a south study area, we called it, on Forest Service ground. And the harvest rates on gobblers were higher on that Forest Service ground than on the Peck Ranch study area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it does make a difference in terms of harvest, seems to me.
Sure. Do you remember what the harvest rate was? I think you may have said it, but I already forgot the number. The harvest rate on hens during the fall season?
Oh, it was it wasn't 10%.
It was under 10.
It was under 10.
I wanted to say 5.
More like 5, I think.
It surprised us. It was really low in North Missouri. We had no idea what to expect.
Mm-hmm. I actually remember reading in y'all's monograph that in some years, correct me if I'm wrong, in some years the illegal harvest of hens in the spring was greater than the fall harvest, the fall legal harvest of hens.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Which that blew my mind to read.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting.
It's interesting because, as I recall, in the Ozarks, I better not say that because I can't remember, but I don't think the illegal harvest of hens was quite as bad down there as it was in North Missouri. Maybe it had something to do with more naive turkey hunters. I don't know, compared to people who turkey hunted down in the Ozarks forever.
So. Yeah, I know that's one thing that comes up a lot still in conversation about, setting season timing is waiting till hens go to nest so that you can potentially reduce that incidental or intentional harvest of hens in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the department now is considering, we've always allowed bearded hens as a legal bird in the spring, but they sent out a survey, and one of the questions was whether or not hunters would support having bearded hens as being not legal during the spring season.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did it early on. John Lewis probably did it to just keep people from screwing up, being wrong on accident. That's why we've allowed bearded hen harvest, but maybe now we're far enough along that we don't need to do that anymore. I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting argument can be made that we here in Missouri in a lot of counties, a buck has to have 4 points on the side to be legal. Waterfowl hunters have to identify birds by species and sex. What's so different about a turkey hunter that we tell them all, we're afraid you can't tell a gobbler from a hen, so if it's got a beard, you can shoot it. And so, there's two sides to the argument, but some good points have been made about why is this still the case, and it's probably an artifact of the early days when it's like, go on out there and hunt, and this one, factor, if you see a beard, you can shoot it, you'd be okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The worry would be, of course, that, anybody that shoots a bearded hen, they made such a regulations that it was illegal, they wouldn't telecheck it, so you'd never know.
Right.
So oh, we got zero hen harvest. Well, you probably didn't.
And as a population factor, I mean, what do we kill? 500 as a ballpark figure. Hens in the spring, but some people argue, again, that's 500 hens right when they're trying to reproduce. So why not tell hunters, hey, we just assumed you didn't shoot these? So it'll be interesting to see what the dialogue around that is.
It comes out.
Yeah, we certainly hear those arguments that it's such a small number. Why worry about it? But then the counter argument is like, well, if we're worried about turkey populations, why are we allowing any to be harvested? So I hear both of those sides quite commonly.
Yeah, I don't think this conversation is going away. And you guys were able to demonstrate that, population models are sensitive to hen survival. And even some more recent work by our colleague Coulter Chitwood out of Oklahoma State. We had him on an episode a while back, and they've amassed, a big data set from a number of published studies where they've been able to do a meta-analysis. And that meta-analysis showed that population growth was most sensitive. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus, but wasn't it to nest success and poult survival?
Yeah, so the models parameterized where those were the vital rates that varied the most, and we had the most control over how much or what the vital rate was.
Right.
But the hen survival was the most important factor to the population trajectory. It just didn't vary very much across all the studies that they quantified it, which
that's right.
Many of those studies were from you guys that they had in that data set.
Yeah, 50% hen survival about. It seems like, isn't that that's what I remember. I mean, it's just pretty constant across studies.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly what the number, it was something like that, but you're right. It was very consistent from study to study across states and across time.
Were you guys involved in any of the restocking when turkeys were moved up to northern Missouri?
Not when they got moved the first time in '61. I was 7 years? We were both 7 years old.
I didn't mean to date you guys back further than necessary. But I think about, a lot of our restoration took place in the 80s. So,
and I was involved in a lot of it that happened in the mid to late '70s and early '80s. Involved in moving birds across a lot more of the northern part of the state, in particular. Involved in the trades that were done for turkeys, river otters, ruffed grouse, pheasants, prairie seed grasses.
We trade anything.
We had the market cornered back in the day. Everybody wanted turkeys. We had turkeys we were willing to trade, and it was interesting to see some of the trades that emanated from that. So I do remember those early days. I remember bringing was the first birds to Wisconsin, and I was standing there looking at some of that habitat, going, "Oh, this is going to be sweet. They're going to be pretty good up here." And Ontario, taking turkeys up to Ontario.
So Missouri
I didn't come until 1985 because I was off doing other stuff, but so by then, basically, the restoration was
pretty well done.
When did we declare it complete? Like 88 or
somewhere. We still had those few counties in southwest Missouri that we still can't figure out what turkeys never have done well. We did some additional releases down there.
McDonald County in the southwest corner of the state. The turkeys, we do not know why. We released way more birds there than anywhere else in the state, and they just kind of hang on. We don't know what's going on.
But it was. That North Missouri release was 12 turkeys, and nasty winter. It was cold. I saw pictures from the the actual release. I talked to people who were there. The department folks said, we got to hurry up and drive back down to South Missouri because we figure the turkeys are going to beat us there if we don't go very fast.
Yeah, the winters were definitely pretty harsh in those days, a lot harsher than they are now.
But it was astounding that, most of the releases of 12 to 15 birds at a county level here in Missouri, you'd get one, maybe two releases in a county, but mostly one.
Yeah,
and
I mean, you're talking, pretty small founding population, really.
Yeah, a couple males and 10 or 12 hens, and off things would go to the races. Pretty intriguing that they were able to respond that well.
When I was working with George Wright, he banded both adult and juvenile gobblers, and the juvenile gobblers were the dispersers, and they would go quite a long distance, really, and that's probably how things spread, to some degree. They really
but John Lewis was a real advocate of getting people excited about turkey hunting. So his mindset was 5 years after a release, he would try and open that county to spring hunting. Pretty much always sought out the concurrence of the conservation agent in the county and any other local staff, but never really ran into problems. But a lot of these counties that opened, and I started hunting some of those in the mid 70s, where there was only a few spots in the entire county where there were turkeys established. And so it was interesting how they, though, over the next decade just became replete across the landscape.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about today is, from your perspective as a biologist, those populations grew rapidly. It sounds like, in some places within 5 years, y'all were hunting them. Did that give you any kind of concern when turkey hunting, I assume, caught on relatively quickly?
Certainly didn't seem to give John Lewis much concern.
No.
He liberalized. I mean, shoot, we had I'd have to look back.
3 days.
Yeah.
3 day season in 1960 was the first season in a few Ozark counties, mostly in counties where turkeys never disappeared in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just kept getting longer and longer. And
I remember I was sitting in Chemistry 101 class at the university in 1976, and this friend of mine was at the door, and he saw me in the row, and he kept sticking two fingers up. What's Kevin Maples?
Yeah.
What the heck's he all excited about? Well, they were going to two birds in 1976.
Yeah.
So John pretty much was always felt, although we didn't have strong data to support it, always felt that gobbler harvest wasn't limiting the population, and he was a big fan of providing opportunity and letting people get out there and enjoy turkey hunting. So
he did do some early telemetry work down at a place called Lake Springs, Missouri, down by Rolla, and he had a little bit of harvest rate data there, but that was some of the first transmitters ever used on turkeys, I think. And of course, they were probably way too big, you know what I mean? But anyway.
But he had band recovery data.
Yeah, he had band recovery data from down there too, because they banded a lot of birds. So
he wasn't flying totally by the seat of his pants, but he, I remember, when was it, 78, we had the first fall season. So, I mean, that was, again, fall before fires. A lot of these populations were certainly existed across an entire county landscape. And it was a pretty good fight to get that through the regulations committee. But again, John felt comfortable that we weren't going to probably impact populations. Yeah. And then when it took off, we started thinking about the North Missouri deal. It's like, wow, we're killing, 600-700 turkeys up here in some of these counties in the fall. And maybe we ought to take a look at whether we're potentially overdoing it.
I think in Adair County one year, we killed like about 800 in the spring, 800 gobblers, and then killed 800 in the fall, the following fall.
Wow.
Like, wow, this is cool. we had 50, we had 50,000 fall turkey hunters, but turkey population densities there were just like incredible. Even on public land, I mean, it was just, I've never seen anything like it.
It sounds like we were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I remember a couple guys that I knew from Mississippi came up to spring turkey hunt one year, and that was maybe 85-ish. We had a lot of birds, and they just, their jaw was on the floor because we can drive around, and there's turkeys here, and there's turkeys there, and there's turkeys over there. He said, in Mississippi, you don't drive around and see turkeys. They don't get anywhere near a road.
I was going to ask you guys, while the populations were apparently just on the, an exponential incline, it sounded like, did you have a feel with some of these banding studies and everything for what the harvest rate was? Like what proportion of the males were getting harvested in some of these areas while the population was rapidly expanding?
Less than 20%. You know what I mean? We could have been way more liberal with our seasons than we were during that exponential growth phase. I've always said that I should have done the 3-week season way earlier than we got it done. Because, missed opportunity there. But it was pretty incredible. On Mineral Hills, we'd released grouse up there, and we were trying to do a grouse route and hear grouse drumming, and the turkeys gobbled so much you couldn't hear grouse drumming. I'm serious.
That's a terrible problem to have.
Yeah, it was terrible problem everywhere.
And, when I started hunting them in Missouri, I'd start going out 1st of April trying to make sure I found 2 or 3. One over here, one over there type of deal. So I've seen it from both ends. We've got pretty darn good turkey hunting right now where we may never see that ridiculous abundance. But it was kind of fun to say it really doesn't matter how many times you screw up because you just go on to the next gobbler.
That's the kind of hunting I need.
It was pretty neat.
So what was the spring turkey hunting knowledge base like at that time when those seasons first started opening up? Were there still a lot of guys around that knew how to do it?
I think there were a few that knew how to do it.
But I'd say few.
But pretty few. There were some Ozarkians that knew how to do it, but probably pretty few. But then early on, people got into it. When did Leroy Braungart?
Well, Leroy was, I bought his record to listen to.
The calling of Leroy Braungart was on a record. Was it like a 45?
45, yeah. But there wasn't a lot of knowledge. There wasn't a lot of what I would say is really correct knowledge now in hindsight, and there wasn't ways to get the information out. So we were I had no damned idea what I was doing out there. So I listened to Leroy's record. He said you had to take a watch with you, and you laid your watch in the leaves, and you never called any more than once every 3 minutes. And all you did was yup, 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 and that was it. And you shut up. And you never went very close to the roosted bird,
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I remember trying to call a bird across a small hollow for about 4 or 5 days, and finally my feeble brain said, well, I don't really care. I'm getting over on that ridge with him. Well, that was the end of that turkey. But, you just were told how incredibly intelligent and they were, and you couldn't push them, you couldn't get near them. But there was 2 people, Ike Ashby, Leroy Braungart, here in Missouri, were kind of the, and then you could listen to the old stuff from Penn's Woods. They had some records out. And
then the guy from the South.
Oh, Ben Lee.
Ben Rogers Lee.
Yeah.
He came up and gave some seminars in Missouri.
Yeah, we had some interesting. He said,
I got to hear more about this.
I was following him at I don't know, probably a calling contest type of deal. maybe early days of the Turkey Federation, but he went on a tirade about how Missouri turkey hunters were never going to be any good because they don't have enough time to turkey hunt. And he went on to, in Alabama, we can kill, 5 turkeys and we can hunt for however long it is. And you all got this short season and nobody's ever going to learn or figure out a darn thing. And he just was lambasting us right and left. But there were just a few people on the circuit that were the turkey personalities of the day. So it was a slow learning curve for me.
By the 80s, though, I think
it started changing.
Yeah, we pretty much.
Ray I came on.
You've heard of Ray I?
Came on the scene
from Missouri here. He came on the scene, and so yeah, it was interesting.
But it was the same with deer hunting. I had to learn to deer hunt with zero anybody telling me a thing, showing me a thing.
Mm-hmm.
No deer. Hunted 9 years before I killed a deer. Kept at it. See a track every now and then. Turkeys were
dedication.
Kind of early on, but it was fun. It was fun to learn. Still learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to hear as especially as spring turkey hunting became more popular over the years from that starting point. What I'm sure that there were probably some controversies that y'all are involved in with ideas about how to manage turkeys. Are there any in particular that stand out to you? A battle, so to speak, that you had to fight related to?
Well, one battle was a 3-week season.
Yeah, that's what I was laughing about.
Yeah, one battle was that. I had recommended that season. It went to the commission. They had already passed.
It was already in print.
It was print that we're going to have a 3-week turkey season, kill 1 bird the first week or 2 the second 2 weeks, So it was already done. That was 1996, I believe. We got a new commissioner on the commission, and they called me down there to a meeting, and by that time that meeting was over, I couldn't save it. He told us that his hired hand down in southwest Missouri somewhere said he wasn't seeing any turkeys, so therefore we shouldn't liberalize. So it was based on one, anecdotal evidence from somebody, and because of that, they rescinded the 3-week season.
Wow!
So that was one controversy. Then we had to do a wild turkey blue ribbon panel. A bunch of citizens came together, and I provided all the information. And eventually, we ended up back with the 3-week season starting in '98. So it took a lot of work to get that done, to get that 3-week season in.
And we had an opportunity. I guess I'll put it that way. We had an opportunity to take this commissioner turkey hunting, and so we took him up to my place there in Adair County and stayed at the cabin and talked a lot about turkeys and turkey biology and had some fun hunting. And by gosh, I must credit the man. He kind of scratched his head about the decision that he'd made to rescind this thing. But I remember when he was leaving, he said, this was a lot of fun. I'd like to come back and do it. And Larry looked at him and said, that'd be great during the 3rd week next year. And he said, I got you. And so we ended up with, him being a supporter and one that pushed moving to this liberalization. So kind of human nature is always part of the equation that falls into the regulatory process. And that was probably the best example.
Yeah.
Back in '76, John Lewis pushed through a fall archery-only turkey season, and that was a fight. And I remember after the regulations committee, which is kind of our internal step before it went to the commission, after that regs committee meeting, the chief of the regs committee said, and don't think, by gosh, you're going to get a fall firearms turkey season, Lewis. John just grinned as he walked out the door, and in '78, by gosh, he got that one through.
Yeah, that hunt, I took this commissioner hunting the next morning, and I had roosted one, and it was classic. I mean, we walked down this ridge. He was roosted on the end of the point, and started getting daylight, and he was gobbling like crazy. And I called a little bit, and I mean, that turkey flew down and walked straight to us. And that turkey was maybe 20 steps from the commissioner, and he hadn't let the bolt of his automatic all the way down, so he's sitting there like this. And so anyway, that was, I mean, it was so classic. You couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, it was as soon as daylight came, when turkeys fly down, he flew down, came straight to us. It was something. Then we worked some more, but I never did get him a turkey. But anyway, that was an interesting time.
But that was probably the biggest hoorah about changing the regulation. You know, back when John Lewis was going from 1 week to 2 weeks to one bird to two birds, those were not really controversial things. Of course, he was the person with all the knowledge and background, and the resource was doing extremely well, and everybody was excited about it. So pretty much they were willing to go with what he said till he threw this fall season out there, and that one was a little sticky, but he got that done, like we said, in '78.
We proposed allowing fall hunting with dogs, that went over like a lead balloon because in the Ozarks in particular, there's kind of a tradition of hunting deer with dogs, which up here is illegal, obviously. And so when they heard about, okay, you're going to let dogs out there in the fall, that means they're going to deer hunt with them, there was no way they were going to allow that.
Mm-hmm.
So
we used to laugh, though. We said, if there's any reg change you wish to get passed on turkeys, just also include fall hunting with dogs.
Yeah.
And everybody will get all focused on the fall hunting with dogs. And
that'd be the decoy.
Yeah, that'll be, anything else will pass if you got the dog thing. About that. We still don't allow. I don't know if we ever proposed it again.
No,
it was
never
kind of
did.
like dead in the water.
Dead in the water, DOA.
So the youth season was interesting. So we went with a youth season for turkey hunting, and you've always got 20-25% of the people that just see it as a death. Anything you do that's different is kind of a death knell. And we're going to have all kinds of hunting accidents. The parents are going to shoot turkeys for the kids. The state of Arkansas will invade Missouri and bring every kid up there, including anybody with an IQ under the age of 16. I mean, they'll just decimate the resource. None of which all proved true, obviously. But it wasn't an easy sell to get the youth season going.
Yeah, I mean, you think it'd be a no-brainer, but it was, way harder than it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
But it's proven, to work extremely well, and none of those problems. When we went from in-person checking to telecheck to internet and phone, mainly internet now, but at that time mainly phone checking, there was again a lot of consternation about, you have to kill your turkey, you have to put your tag on it, you have to bring it to the check station. There'll be a lot more illegal activity because you now no longer have to do this. And there were others in the camp of, if you're going to be an illegal hunter, you're going to be an illegal hunter, and you just don't bring it to the check station.
Yeah.
Just go, pull its beard off, kick it over the ridge, and go hunt another one. So that was, there was limited consternation around doing that. I'm trying to think of what else might.
I had a similar question. I was really curious whether or not there was any controversy or what your relationship was like with some of the other folks doing research, like George Hurst or Dan Speak, those guys that were around, through the same time period.
I'd say generally very collegial.
Yeah, pretty collegial.
I mean, I think
there was a Midwestern deer and turkey study group meeting,
mm-hmm.
and which was a bunch of Midwestern state, and then there's the Southeast wild turkey study group. I guess I don't know what they call it.
And Missouri claims residency in both. One of the few states that goes to both.
Yeah, we talked to those folks, at these meetings quite a bit. I mean, I consider a lot of these guys friends, because we'd see each other every year at these meetings. So those meetings were pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And then the early turkey symposia, which kind of an every 5-year deal. I mean, those were certainly things we look forward to. And then NWTF kind of came online, and they used to have the technical committee. Maybe they still do. But the technical committee would always meet associated with the convention and discuss opportunities to fund turkey research, priority research needs. So a very tight-knit group, really.
Yeah, and while we're talking about the Turkey Federation, I should say here that the Turkey Federation funded the bulk of our wild turkey research. They really did. They gave us a lot of money. We got some money from Safari Club International and a few other places, but a lot of our research was funded by the Turkey Federation. And of course, the department put in a lot, the most, but the Turkey Federation, I can't remember how much we had. I can't remember
how much, but I remember it was substantial.
It was a lot, quite a bit.
But now George Hurst, he demonized me because I came to the great state of Mississippi in sometime 485. I don't remember the year, but I had a goblin Jake come in, and I blasted it, and I got a handwritten. I'll find it someday. I know I didn't throw it away, but I got the nastiest 3-page handwritten letter you've ever seen about how in God's creation can somebody who's a turkey biologist shoot a Jake. And I think that might have been before George had got helped push the no Jakes stuff a little further into I don't think it was regular. It wasn't a regulation then, or I'd have been in violation. But he was already of that mindset, and he thought I should know better. And it was a hilarious letter to read. I mean, scathing, absolutely.
Yeah, got in trouble with George.
Yep.
So how did he find out about it?
Well, I came down and hunted with an individual, Wes Berger.
Yeah.
Mississippi State. Well, Wes did his PhD work with me and some others. And so Wes and I were very close. And when he finished his PhD, he went down to Mississippi State. And I said, "You got anywhere I can go turkey hunt down there, Wes?" He said, "Sure, come on down." So I did, but just through word of mouth, probably Jim Miller or somebody told George I'd shot a Jake or Godwin or, one.
Yeah.
I'm sure it just was, Eric was down here and he killed a Jake. And boy, that set George off, obviously, because it was quite the letter. It was fun to read. So we picked on each other pretty hard too, which was always good.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a little friendly competition.
Yeah.
Have y'all seen any, thinking about more recently, any regulation changes that have been made or in Missouri or elsewhere that have been concerning to you or surprising, maybe is a better word?
Well,
you go first. We're going to be at the same place.
I think we're going to be at the same place, but all these restrictions that states are putting on gobbler harvest and those sorts of things, they're not going to make any difference in terms of the population growth or population loss. They're just, I don't know. They're just, we got to do something, so let's do this. Well, I'm not sure that's a very good policy, to tell you the truth. Because I think limiting the gobbler harvest is probably, I know it's just not going to have an impact on the population growth.
And if you want to limit it under the argument of opportunity. So there's fewer gobblers out there, and so I want to make sure everybody has some reasonable opportunity to shoot
Mm-hmm.
birds. So instead of letting the predator types like Mike Hubbard kill three, we're gonna knock that back a notch or two and tell him he can only get two. That argument I can take, but the idea that it's going to somehow
solve
our dilemma of low reproductive output is a misnomer in my book. And I'd say the same for a lot of the degree to which fall season regs have changed. You know, Kansas, say you could kill four of them in Kansas, they were just like flies, and they were everywhere. And then they knocked that down to I forget what number, but now they went to no fall season. And I'm like, your harvest rate isn't high enough it's going to make any difference with some, some limited opportunities. So again, are you suggesting that that's going to fix the problem we've got? That killing hens in the fall is just, that's the reason that's the reason we have low turkey abundance in areas. Don't think so. So we'll see. And I think I mentioned to you last time the eastern Oklahoma work in the Kiamichis when turkeys were thick over there, and they had a very liberal 3-bird limit long season. And when population started declining in the late 80s, they went ahead and started doing the same thing we're seeing today. They went from 3 to 2, and they shortened the season, and they went from 2 to 1, and they went to a 2-week season, and they did all these things with spring harvest that didn't show to really have any
didn't change a thing
impact on what's happening with the population. So I think there's some evidence out there in the literature too that suggests that those things aren't going to fix it. But biologists at the state level are under a lot of pressure. You're supposed to fix it.
Sure. So do y'all think that, that decline that we're seeing right now is something related to habitat or?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. You guys are an enormous wealth of knowledge with a lot of experience, and you had your finger on the pulse for decades. What do you have some ideas about what you think is happening with populations? I guess to add to what Will was just asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is habitat. I mean, I think perhaps some element of weather change. I don't know. That's probably way iffy.
That's a real hypothesis, my friend.
Yeah, there's no evidence for that. But I'd say that your best bet if you want to increase populations is to improve habitat, in particular brood habitat. That would be my guess. I mean, that's what I think we should probably concentrate on if we want to increase turkey populations to any degree. But we're still going to have these fluctuations because all these populations everywhere have stabilized now. And things are going to go up and down all the time, just like they have in our Missouri Ozarks.
Yeah.
There are always birds there, and they've always fluctuated quite a bit down there. So, I mean,
I remember
that's what we're going to see in the future too.
Yeah, I remember a quote from one of y'all's papers. I can't remember if it was from data in the 80s or the 90s, but there was a section in that paper that was already where you guys were already talking about we may be seeing evidence of density dependence in some of our Missouri populations, where they had essentially saturated all the available habitat.
Yeah, I think we did probably talk about that. I'm not sure how exactly that mechanism works, but how density dependence works. But I think there's got to be some element there, density dependence, causing the population to start to level off and start to fluctuate. I mean, that's the basic theory we all learned. Hidden carrying capacity and all that.
True.
And one of the things just of interest that we've played with is looking at years post restoration, where some of these populations start to decline, and at ballpark 25 years, 25 years, and you can start to look at So we asked the question, okay, well, is it habitat? Is it other factors out there on the landscape that are changing? But this is pretty predictably happened across a huge geography.
Yeah,
You know?
every
Yeah,
county.
everywhere with restocking.
Yeah.
If they didn't have birds, you put some in. 25 years later, they start this. Start this fluctuation.
And we'd look at when things were getting a little rough here, getting a little rough in southern Wisconsin. You could go to central Wisconsin where they released birds, practically a decade later, and their populations were still strong. And we could go to Kentucky and say, well, the hunting's still good in Kentucky, but it's probably got about 4 or 5 years left. And then Jack, what was Jack's last name in Tennessee? A biologist. One of the last states to actively restore easterns, and Tennessee was one of the ones that was still doing great when everything else was going down the tubes. So you're sitting there going, there's got to be something to this normal fluctuation in populations that's going to occur post restoration. It's not all habitat or other factors.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to? I mean, we've had several people come on our show that have mentioned that same trend and patterns across states and even within a state, depending on when the region within the state was stocked. So it's interesting that you guys brought that up. And man, what I would give to know more about what is the limiting, what factors become limiting first.
Yeah.
Well, I think we mentioned when we recorded previously, we had Mike Byrne on, who's now at the university there in Missouri.
Yeah.
They had a paper a few years back that showed pretty compelling evidence, I would say, of density dependence, not the mechanism, but they had, data from various states. And to me, it was fairly convincing that that density dependence might be acting. I think they proposed in that study that it may be limitation in nesting because of the social structure. Is that right, Will? Do you remember?
Yeah, they hypothesized that, good nesting cover runs out quickly because of the spatial segregation that hens prefer during the nesting phase. So because they're spacing themselves out, they're using much more than just that area around the nest. And that could become a limiting factor first. And in fact, they found decreasing recruitment was closely correlated with increasing population size. And in addition to that, they found some other hallmarks of density dependence, like increased adult hen survival. And then they were seeing more hens without broods, but the brood size for the hens that did have a brood remained about the same.
Yeah, and then I know I mentioned to you before, there's also some circumstantial evidence, I think, that we have talked about a few times now with various guests, showing that when we have a big hatch of cicadas, we will commonly see higher poult per hen ratios at large spatial scales, and then 2 years later, a spike in hunter harvest of males, which then makes me wonder, is there an insect limitation, that's acting? Or I guess an alternative hypothesis is that it could release turkeys from predation if they have generalist predators that prey switch. They could switch to cicadas instead of poults or eggs. So just some interesting ideas, and I enjoyed listening to you guys talk about it before. So if you have any comments or thoughts about those, love to hear it again.
What would we say last time?
I can't remember what I said.
I can't remember either, but I enjoyed listening.
I mean, like you said, we just don't understand, how some of these things are operating within population. Tough to ferret that out. I don't know what good nesting cover is because turkeys haven't convinced me they have a clue either.
Nests everywhere.
Just an absolute generalist, and you'd think, my brain would say, well, if you're nesting here, by gosh, that's a good spot. You're going to be successful. And that didn't always pan out. We couldn't really tease out much of anything about whether you were nesting in heavy old field brushy covers out in the middle of hardwoods sitting at the base of a white oak, whether you were going to be more successful. So I don't know how limiting nesting cover is, but then, how important is that cover around the nest and the area that hen frequents while she's laying? And we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know what could be some of the factors there. And, I'm glad that Mike and others are trying to tease some of that out, and some of the work they're doing now in Missouri hopefully will help us maybe even understand that a little better down the road.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful, especially with a lot of the poult tagging that we're starting to do, and I think Mike's group is doing that too.
Yeah.
That's a huge information gap that we've had for a long time. I mean, I feel like we've been keeping up with 28-day poult survival pretty well for a while, but pretty much past that we don't really know.
And the insect hypothesis, I think, has got some validity, and I think that issue's been brought about across a wide gamut of avian species in particular, that insect abundance or lack thereof, or changes in insect abundance, could definitely be driving things in some of our systems. Again, not well understood, but
but that brings you back to having better brood habitat, which produces more insects.
Yeah, I mean,
so to me,
it seems like we're losing both that and insect populations at the same time.
Well, that has been a consistent message from many researchers now, that brooding cover, high quality brooding cover, is dramatically limited in most of the landscape. Regardless of which state and which researcher we're talking to, they basically all come to that conclusion. So I was curious about the nesting. One idea that kind of came into my head when you guys were talking about it a minute ago, I wonder if there is a signature of what is good nesting cover. Maybe they don't have strong selection for it, but if you have a lot of it, they accidentally end up in it. I was kind of thinking about it from that perspective. So if they're just going to randomly put it somewhere, and then you have a place that's relatively high quality, then they just accidentally end up in high quality nesting cover that they can be successful in.
There could certainly be truth to that one. I'd have to say I don't know.
You guys told us a story last time about, I think I asked you the question, what was the most unique place that you ever saw a hen nest? And I remember you telling us about the roadside hen.
The road ditch,
Road ditch.
Oh boy, right up off of Highway K. There in Adair County. I remember, and for multiple years, this hen, they're pretty much have an affinity to a place they like to go nest, and for multiple years that bird was radioed. She nested in the same darn road ditch, and it was the dumbest looking spot to a biologist, but it would have been a pretty good spot for her because she did well. She was a producer.
That does bring up something else too, the fact that, as I recall, and I don't know that we ever did a real good analysis of it, but it seemed like there were certain hens that were successful almost all the time, and then there were other hens that were terrible. They never did anything. They might as well not have been in the population almost.
The bad moms.
There are. I think there's some truth to this idea that some hens are a lot better at bringing off broods than others.
Yeah.
And it's not a juvenile adult thing.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, it didn't have to do with age necessarily. But
do you think that could be related to dominance? And I was specifically thinking about if there are some good places to nest and a dominant individual gets to choose that, she may end up being more successful than the ones that are relegated to everywhere else. And if you think about modeling nest site selection, we would, I guess, expect. If there's a small proportion of hens that get to choose the best, well, we wouldn't know who those individuals are. And if you just model the whole population, we'd end up with relatively weak selection overall in that model, even though these really good hens got to choose somewhere really good.
Yeah.
Well, it is pretty clear anecdotally from all the years of doing this that some of them have it figured out more than the others. And whether they get to say, sorry, this place is mine, I don't know.
That could be, though. I mean,
interesting to think about it.
Yeah.
Really
do y'all have any recollection as to whether or not those few good hens that you remember, did they tend to nest earlier?
I don't remember any. I don't remember that.
I don't remember getting a feel that was the case.
Yeah.
Well, that's some oddly specific information to ask someone to recall. I understand. But I figured I'd try.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
But, you know, you think we might have noticed it if that was the case.
Yeah, if they were always the first ones to go.
Yeah. I don't think that was the case.
And they didn't always pick road ditches. Most of them picked what again the human eye would say, well, that's got to be better because it's denser. I can't remember feeling that way, that they were in what I would consider somewhat better locations in terms of the structure. Now the road ditch, it was kind of like, man, just this linear strip of stuff that you'd think a predator would have a field day in, but you know, that was still working too. But structurally, and we didn't measure, you know, structure at the nest sites, but I do remember thinking, yeah, these would be some pretty decent spots to stay hidden compared to the one that's out, you know, sitting at the base of the white oak in the timber.
Yeah.
So are you saying the hens that, from what you recall, the hens that tended to be successful tended to be in what you would call better structure?
The hens that I remember who were multi-year successors, you know, the ones that, you know, the few that I can remember, this tended to be in sites that were structurally dense. I guess is the best word. Because you had others that might as well be nesting like a woodcock. You know, it's just like, there was one right there on the ground. And I don't know, that's an interesting thought about whether dominance, all this dominance that goes on, and you know, turkeys, man, I mean, they are good at it. Everybody's got their pecking order, and they're always fighting each other for who's the boss. So why? And what benefit does that have to an individual? Got to be something.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time beating each other up, chasing each other around. Boy, dominance. We once decided to trap some turkeys with alpha chlorelose to make them goofy, and we only did it once for a variety of reasons. But I remember on the corn bait site, some blue jays came in and they were eating the corn. Well, they got pretty well inebriated and they were stumbling around. And here comes a flock of about 40 hens and poults. And man, dominance in action. The first one grabbed one of those blue jays to try and tear it apart, and the fight started. And I wished I'd have had a way to film that, because, by gosh, the boss hens finally ended up with the biggest parts of the birds, and they tore them to smithereens and chased each other around and pulled pieces out of each other's mouths. And I was like, whoa, these guys.
I thought you were going to say that they were in there eating the corn in the order, but they were eating the blue jays.
Well, they ate the blue jays first. They fought over the blue. You know, it was like, Marcus, you can't pick up that blue jay and get away with it. You know, and it was just a rat race. They ate the birds, then they ate the corn. You know. And then we were able to catch some of them, and just didn't turn out to be a way. We were having trouble getting them to come to the cannon net sites once the nets were set up. And it was like, okay, we're going to try and drug them, but there's a certain percentage of them that get semi-drugged, and you can't ever catch them. They just stay ahead of you. They can just fly one more time and glide, and we just said, nah, this isn't going to work either. We probably got too much ancillary mortality associated with it. But boy, they dismembered.
Not to mention the blue jay mortality.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of something to watch, but that dominance has always intrigued me. They spend a lot of time worrying about who's on first.
Well, I know there have certainly been times where I'm having a hard time getting turkeys to come to a net that I wish I could put some alpha chlorelose bait out there.
Oh, yeah.
Or some blue jays. Maybe you're baiting with the wrong thing.
You can't control the dose very well. And then we had some that we just couldn't catch them, but something else probably did later on in the day.
Yeah, probably not a very good method to use now.
Right. Well, are there any other memorable findings, things that may have surprised y'all over your research careers? Or, I mean, we can go with another funny story. I'm always good for those too.
This is not a funny story, but it was an interesting thing to happen in the Ozarks, and that is we had like a 20-inch snow down there, which is very unusual. And then on top of that, freezing rain. And that year there was no acorns also. So this is an anecdote, if you will.
Yeah.
And literally the guys that go down there by the 11-Point River, that's where the birds were roosting. And they actually found just dead turkeys laying under the trees, and they'd fallen out of the trees. They had no breast muscle. They basically were starving, I think. I mean, there was no evidence of predation. So that kind of really surprised me. But fortunately, those kind of conditions are extremely rare in the Ozarks. But they couldn't get through that crust. I mean, it was a crust of ice on top of 20 inches of snow. And anyway, there was nothing to eat under it anyway. So we actually did find dead birds that our conclusion was that they starved to death.
Wow.
So they didn't have enough reserves. You think a turkey would have enough reserves to sit up there for a week if they had to, and probably normally they could.
Well, and in southern Minnesota, when Bill Porter did his PhD work up there, they had birds, can't remember the numbers in a paper somewhere, but they had birds stay on roost, for weeks on end.
Yeah.
And some of the bad winters they saw.
They never even left the roost.
Yeah, late 70s. Up there, he was doing his work on that whitewater wildlife management area in southeastern Minnesota. And they saw birds staying up on roost a long period of time.
Wow.
And but starving is a tough way to go.
Yeah.
So in that case, you think if the cold event had not aligned with a mast failure, they probably would have been fine.
That's what I
wonder.
What I think. I mean, I think in our paper there's a weak correlation between acorn production and nest success or survival. I can't remember which one. I think nest success, but it's pretty weak. Pretty weak correlation. But
well, there's so many factors that go into that. You think if you can find any relationship, that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. And I truly believe that, I mean, it was a tough year that year. There was really no acorns. Squirrel population plummeted. It was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I've wondered a lot about in the context of, people down here where we are in Alabama and Florida are worried about the effects of wild pigs all the time. And, wild pigs compete with turkeys a lot for acorns. So it does make me wonder, what is that doing to their body condition? Obviously, our winters aren't as harsh, but still that body condition going into spring has to matter.
Yeah, it's almost like it's exploitative competition where the pigs just eat everything before the turkeys get a hold of it.
Yeah, I mean, I did a study with mallards at Patuxent and basically had a, a group that was fed full feed, ad lib feed, and then I restricted the diet on uh, another group, and there was a definite effect on egg production.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you'd think how fat they are going into spring would make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Going into a harsh winter, either way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just a hard thing to study. I wonder if we have enough legacy mass crop data and enough pieces of data from turkey studies that we could put together to look for a correlation between those two now.
Yeah, I don't know. We actually had mass data because we put out hoops, plots. So we had plots out there, and the technicians would go and collect acorns, once a week from them or something, and so we counted how much mass production there was. So we had a good handle on it.
Okay.
Mhm.
A lot better than we also had this index where our foresters look up in the trees and say, yeah, good.
And
fair.
we've got that from back in the 50s.
We've got that since the 50s.
Wow.
Not as good.
Relative measure of
Relative.
It catches the bumper years. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
it definitely does.
It catches the years where
There's
you have nothing, and the rest are all kind of mashed together in the middle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, in areas where people really hammer the pig population, has there been anything in the South that's shown any type of turkey response?
So I'm kind of trying to address that right now with some of my work in Alabama, where we've got some properties where we put out recording devices to track gobbles, and we've been looking at, or we haven't analyzed the data yet, but we're planning to look at trends in gobbling activity pre and post pig removal on that site. It's actually a series of properties that are all kind of being trapped collaboratively. So it's a fairly large acreage across which we're trying to reduce pig densities to see if there's a response in gobbling activity. But other than that, the only thing that I'm aware of is that work is being the principal investigator is one of my colleagues, Steve Ditchkoff, and he has a student that just finished up recently that was doing a similar pig removal experiment, and they were running a grid of like a trail camera array throughout the area, and they documented a several 100% increase in turkey activity in the area following the pig removal.
Huh.
So it does seem we don't know how the presence of pigs is factoring into vital rates, but it does seem to be pretty clear that at least past some certain density of pigs, turkeys are behaviorally excluded from that area. They just don't want to be around that many pigs.
Interesting. We've been working on them here in Missouri. We got several hogs in southeast Missouri mostly.
Yeah, some populations over in Southwest, but they think they've maybe gotten those under control.
So we're working on them.
Yeah, we're kind of at the point here where we're just trying to maintain as low a level as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You probably still have people that release them, right? So they can hunt them.
We do. Yeah. They've gotten pretty harsh on that from a legal perspective, but it's still happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, when I think of hogs, and then my mind goes to the stuff that I hear anecdotally about predators, and predators as the main culprit in turkey decline. And I always struggled with that when, going back to what we talked about how some of these populations post restoration, let's say 20 years, start to decline. So somebody would be saying, man, it's got to be the predators that are hammering us here in Missouri. And I said, do you think it's any different over there in Kentucky, where they still got turkeys running out of their ears?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, kind of makes you think they've got the same types of landscapes. They don't have any trappers and coon hunters anymore. They've got a variety of predators that are probably abundant. And yeah, they've still got a lot of turkeys. And so I'm not quite sure I buy more into the hogs is what I'm getting at is maybe being some type of factor that's competing with food that could affect populations or could even exclude birds from using an area than I do the issue that I hear nowadays about predators. I don't know. We seem to have a rebounding turkey population across most of Missouri right now. You know, our harvest grew 20 some percent. Anecdotally, we're seeing birds. Last year was a pretty darn good hatch. This year's a pretty darn good hatch. And we're not doing predator control at any level. So I sometimes wonder about the role they play or don't play in driving populations.
Yeah.
It's just a natural part of the population process almost.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I'm definitely not going to go out on that limb and say that the predator, whole context hasn't changed over the years. It almost certainly has, but at the same time, I get presented with similar questions about predation a lot when I go speak to landowners and things like that. And I have some data on the number of reported raccoons and possums trapped in Alabama. And as you can imagine, a lot of them were trapped in the 70s and 80s. Yep. And then it pretty much went down to nothing when the fur market collapsed. And we're actually seeing a little bit of a resurgence in trapping, in recent years. But that time period when there was almost no trapping going on happens to coincide with our record statewide harvest of turkeys.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned Dan Speak earlier. I still remember a paper he gave at the Turkey Symposium in 1980 where they'd put out cyanide, all over the landscape and killed all kinds of stuff.
Mostly dogs.
Well, there were quite a few dogs. I remember that.
We talked about that paper in detail.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
Where I'm going with that is the scale at which and the intensity at which they do that to see a minimal, potentially a relationship and a little better reproductive success where they didn't do it.
Yeah.
The study design has flaws like all of ours do, but I think you got to be at a scale that most people, when the landowner or turkey enthusiast is like, well, if I can go knock over a few coons, I'm going to solve this. And it's like, no, if you're talking about predation and you're trying to make a dent in predation, you're going to have to be aggressive over a large landscape for a long period of time.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
people can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to do it.
Right. Well, and the thing, go ahead, Marcus.
No, you were.
I was just going to say that one thing that Marcus and I have been talking about a lot too, on and off the air, is, people want to talk about what we're not doing these days as far as trapping, and the participation in that has gone way down compared to historic highs, obviously. But we don't talk about as often what we are doing now that we didn't used to do. And that's the thing that comes to mind for me is putting out as much, feed and bait, especially for deer, compared to what we did historically.
Yeah, we're subsidizing many of the predators we're pointing a finger at, like raccoons in particular. They're the primary visitor to a deer feeder. In every study, and everybody that has set up near a feeder knows that or had a camera on one. The other thing I was going to add, similar to that, we have had discussions. We're talking about habitat quality for nesting or brooding, and one of the reasons that in improving nesting or brooding cover is effective is because it reduces predation. So it is an anti-predator strategy to improve habitat, whereas predator removal is not improving habitat. So you get both with one practice and don't get both with the other.
Correct. Yeah.
I had about a month ago at a meeting, somebody espoused, and I don't know where they got the number, but they said it was based on some science, but it wasn't a place where you could quiz them. They said, a recent study shown if you have greater than a coon per 6 acres, then you're going to affect your turkey population. And that's another thing, I guess, the point I want to make is we need to appreciate what you guys are doing. We don't have all the right answers, but we need to be out there talking about these things that somehow get out there in the public eye and then roll with it. I don't know where that came from, but number one, I don't know how the heck the landowner, I'm going to go out and tell whether I have a coon per 6.
Yeah.
And then I guess if I get it to a coon per 5, life's good for my turkeys, right? And so, So I think probably an observation over time was that the state biologist was kind of the de facto orb of knowledge about turkeys in the 70s, early 80s. And then the TV personalities came on, the VHS tapes and all that stuff. And the biologists were kind of moved out of the equation. And the celebrities became the de facto orb of knowledge about everything. And I think having things like you guys are doing brings the biologist back into the mix. Mm-hmm. I think both people have a place at the table, but I think we haven't had as much good discussion about what do we know, what don't we know, what hypotheses are weak, what seem to have some strength to them, and those can easily get overtaken by things like that anecdote I heard at that meeting. I still like to figure out where that number came from,
which. I can almost, you can almost imagine where it came from.
I got an idea.
They pulled it out of there, you know where.
I've never heard of this study.
It'd be hard to measure that.
For 6 acres. Yeah,
it'd be hard to measure that.
Well, I'm particularly passionate, and Marcus gives me a hard time about it sometimes, about taking on that kind of misinformation online, because a lot of that stuff gets posted on, Facebook and Instagram and places like that. And there's a few times that I've reposted those things and asked people to actually show me the data on it. And you can imagine I get a lot of tomatoes thrown at me over stuff like that. But
well, I think that's one of the issues you guys were talking about. Decades ago, there was no way to get information out. In mass communication. Right. Now, everybody can communicate at a massive scale. So, and those kinds of anecdotes or opinions or whatever get magnified. And
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. As biologists, oftentimes we chose this career because we didn't really want to be,
in the spotlight.
Hooked to a camera and a microphone.
Yeah.
So we haven't had much of a voice.
That's true, and I think again I applaud what you all are up to.
Yeah,
I think it's really important. I've listened to. I'm not a big podcast fan. I don't spend time on the internet looking at what people are saying, but I hear a lot of what's going on from people I know. And we got to have some balance out there. And I think this is very useful to achieve that end. And we certainly don't have all the answers. The other thing that I think is an interesting artifact of life in humans, the job of the biologist is to keep the population of species X at an all-time high forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And part of that
I don't care what species it is.
Yeah.
If you're a duck hunter, by gosh, they got to be, and you figure out how to keep them up there forever. And that in itself kind of goes against the grain of normal dynamics in populations.
And part of that's self-inflicted, because if you look at the news release from the Conservation Department, well, we had another record turkey harvest, and we said that over and over again in those years when things were growing exponentially. Nobody ever said, well, don't expect this to continue forever. So some of it was self-inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's a good point.
I guess we know better now. Another controversy real quick was one that I'd kind of forgotten about, but in Adair County, where Eric was talking about, we did the release in 61. Mm-hmm. The population took a real nosedive, and the community up there was really upset about that. And so I went to a public meeting up there, and it was, they were not happy. Mm-hmm. And they were expecting those sky-high populations to continue. And Man, they didn't. And what you saw was the turkeys were in these, what I might call marginal habitats, little draws and stuff out in the
Little
middle of giant
riparian,
fields.
yeah.
And what happens is, as the population shrinks, the turkeys end up going back to the better habitat, if you will, the more forested parts of it. And they leave that habitat that's out there in the middle of nowhere in the crop fields.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah. Anyway, they were really upset about that. And the people didn't like my answer, which was, it's a population fluctuation and you'll be okay. But man, I got some grief over that one. That they didn't like that.
Yeah, I've had several.
The population has rebounded, but it's not. It's still not close to what it was in '87.
No, but it's rebounded reasonable enough. That and people have acclimated.
Yeah. Nobody's griping now.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, we're seeing turkeys, and it's the people who remember the '80s are getting fewer.
They are getting fewer.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I've had several very avid turkey hunters comment to me over the past several years about how it seems to be that we've still got turkeys in kind of the core habitats where we've always had them, or where they first started out at. But the difference between, 10, 15 years ago and now is that they're not everywhere. That it seems like the population expanded to a point to where birds were pushed out into suboptimal areas that they normally wouldn't occupy, just because there was no room left in the good stuff, so to speak.
And I saw that again anecdotally, but I've hunted the same area in eastern Kansas for 25 years. And it couldn't be that my buddy that farms over there and I could go haul a load of grain. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing turkeys, scattered across the landscape. He happens to have a really good chunk of good habitat. And as things contracted, it's now down to the point where his place and a few others I could name have birds, and nobody sees them anywhere else. They're just not out in those other habitats now. Now that may eventually change again too. I don't know.
Another good reason to focus on habitat at the property level. Make sure you're that stronghold.
I don't know how much property you have to have, but we never seem to get down to the bottom of the barrel at our place on 400 acres, which is not huge, but
we got birds. Seem to always have fairly good number of birds.
Yeah, we never got as low as a lot of places got. Let's put it that way. Places just miles away, that I've hunted on again for forever, and you couldn't buy a turkey anymore over there.
Yeah.
But we're a couple miles from Burton's spot, and we can go over there, and we've always had birds.
What are you doing for the birds on the property? Just out of curiosity.
A lot of warm season grass, a lot of burning, a lot of woodland management, and probably the woodland management more than anything else. If I look at some of the comparable places where we saw turkeys dwindle down to next to nothing, their forest is all, fairly mature forest without any understory. And our forest is all kinds of junk in the understory, fully open. In the spring, sometimes you can't see the gopher coming because there's too darn much buckbrush. But I'd say that we've put a pretty strong focus on doing that.
Yeah. And some of it's in CRP, and even that I think is pretty good habitat sometimes, depending on where you are in the mid-contract management and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we
burned it all.
We burn it. We manage it. We don't just let it sit there and grow up and
it's not
10 years worth of rank vegetation.
Turkey poles can walk through it. Let's put it that way. And they do. I've seen them.
Yeah, I mean, I just keep going back to this point that y'all were making earlier about, we always advertise when we have another record harvest, and intuitively, like a person with an IQ sufficient to tie their shoes knows that a population can't increase forever, but we
Yeah,
still have that expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Or at least that it doesn't sharply decline.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I get it, I sure like the way things were when they were replete on the landscape.
Yeah. Doesn't mean we don't want to get back there.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen in Missouri anyway. I would have predicted a more dramatic decline in hunters, and we haven't seen that in spring
Mhm.
hunting. Because I thought a lot of people, they just go set their pop up blind in the spot that works for them, and they stay there and they kill turkeys. And you might actually have to get out and do a little more hunting and chasing now to
Mhm.
find a bird. But we haven't
Mhm.
seen a huge decline. What, 10% maybe
10%.
in hunters throughout this whole low, and now a reasonable rebound. So I guess I would have guessed that would have been different, but it's not.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, it's great to have all that hunter support, and they're buying licenses, and that's going to conservation and enabling us to do this research and the land management and all those things. But it's a demand on the resource at the same time. So that's
Mm-hmm.
always, I mean, you guys know better than anyone. That's that tightrope that you have to walk as a state agency biologist.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And
Mhm.
then how do you distribute that resource
Right.
opportunity across the users, and give everybody a reasonably fair chance of going out and hearing some turkeys and having a good turkey season?
By the way, that's another thing on the docket for the conservation department is to allow the questions they're asking on this questionnaire. Would you favor all day turkey hunting? Because we're
Hmm.
one of the few states that still hunt half day.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I actually got an email about that recently showing me that was on the docket.
yeah, that's on the docket. So you're talking about opportunity. That'll provide quite a bit more opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got some people again that, well, the only reason our hunting's good is because we hunt half a day. And I'm like, John Lewis put that in because he opened a county 5 years after stocking, and he thought, well, I'm going to be a little conservative, so we'll just let him go.
Yeah,
But now it's become biological fact.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what's
Got to protect those hens.
that's what's
the
making
reason.
things good. And I'm like, it's denying a lot of people opportunity to go out and turkey hunt. A lot of people that
Hmm.
don't even turkey hunt now because I got a daughter who's a elementary school teacher. She doesn't get to hunt anymore. She got to be at work in the
Mm-hmm.
mornings, and so you start thinking about all that and what's the role of the agency in providing opportunity. And it's not like we're chopping a new trail here. I mean, just about every state's gone through these headaches
Hmm.
and decided, yeah, we're going to expand opportunity, and then there's not any real substantive impact on gobbler harvest. So we'll see what happens, but I'm glad they're talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, was there anything else that y'all wanted to share? I want to be respectful of your time. We've been going an hour and a half already, if you can believe
Yeah.
that. But
Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah, I
but
think we're supposed to vacate the room in like 5 minutes. So
They're going to kick you out.
Got to get over to campus.
But we have really, really enjoyed and appreciated y'all's conversation and y'all's input on some of our
Absolutely.
questions. I mean, I think I'm repeatedly humbled when I go back to not just the work that y'all were directly involved in, but several of our other predecessors that we've mentioned today. And there's a lot of things that we're still talking about today that they were addressing back then. And sometimes you look back and you find out it's already been addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, it is interesting to hear you guys talking about some of the same conversations that we're all
yeah,
still having.
absolutely. Yeah.
When we're at the working group meeting or whatever, still haven't addressed some of these data gaps or knowledge gaps.
Well, it's I think frustrating in the sense that some of these conversations are still going on unresolved, but I think it's also encouraging in the sense that there's people that have been through this before and they've gotten through it, and likely we will too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Was there anything you want to leave the audience with before we end the show?
Not really for me. I'm glad to talk to you guys, though. It's fun. It's fun to think back about all the stuff that, all the stuff that you did a long time ago.
Yeah. That sure is fun for us to listen to.
All I'd share with your audience is, those of y'all who are listening, tell a friend to listen to this that likes turkey hunting and is interested in turkeys, because it's another chance to get some information they may not see in other places.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, we really do appreciate that. All right. Well, Will, anything else?
That's all I've got. I'm glad we got a chance to re-record with y'all, because I feel like, not only from, getting to actually air an episode, because we didn't record enough of it to air it before, but we had that internet lag too. And I feel like we couldn't have the conversation that we really wanted to have. And, second to actually being able to be face to face, I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I did as well. Glad we got to do it again. Maybe we can have you guys again sometime. I don't feel like we've even scratched the surface on illuminating the knowledge you guys carry.
I'd say you better hurry before we forget, though. We may forget it all.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys have already forgotten more about turkeys than I ever knew.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thanks again.
All right. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Take care now.
Take care.
Yeah, hope y'all have a good fall. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.